The categories can be organized into three subcategories by what they predicate about the subject. 1. The predicate is the subject itself. If the predicate is that which is the subject itself and does not exist in the subject, the predicate is substance. For example, Susan is a human being. 2. The predicate exists in the subject. If the predicate exists in the subject absolutely, as flowing from matter, the predicate is a quantity. Susan is tall. If the predicate exists in the subject absolutely, as flowing from form, the predicate is a quality. Susan is intelligent. If the predicate exists in the subject relatively with respect to another, the predicate is the category relation. Susan is Mary's daughter. 3. The predicate exists in something extrinsic to the subject. If the predicate exists in something extrinsic to the subject and is partially extrinsic as a principle of action in the subject, the predicate is an action. Susan analyzed the data. If the predicate exists in something extrinsic to the subject and is a terminus of action in the subject, the predicate is a passion. Susan was injured. If the predicate exists in something extrinsic to the subject and is wholly extrinsic as a measure of the subject according to time, the predicate is in the category when. Susan was late. If the predicate exists in something extrinsic to the subject and is wholly extrinsic as a measure of the subject according to place, the predicate is in the category where. Susan is here. If the predicate exists in something extrinsic to the subject and is wholly extrinsic as a measure of the subject according to the order of parts, the predicate is in the category posture. Susan is standing. If the predicate exists in something extrinsic to the subject and is merely adjacent to the subject, the predicate is in the category habiliment. Susan is in evening dress. Language and reality. 7 important definitions emerge from consideration of language and reality. 1. The essence is that which makes a being what it is, and without it, it would not be the kind of being it is. 2. Nature is essence viewed as the source of activity. 3. The individual is constituted of essence, existent in quantified matter plus other accidents. Essence is that which makes the individual like other members of its class. Quantified matter is that which makes the individual different from other individuals in its class because matter, extended by reason of its quantity, must be this or that matter, which by limiting the form individuates it. Accidents are those notes, shapes, colors, weights, sizes, etc., by which we perceive the difference between the individuals of a class. The individuals within a species, for example, all human beings, are essentially the same, but they are not merely accidentally different, they are individually different. Even if individuals were as alike as the matches in a box of matches or the pins in a paper of pins, they would be nonetheless individually different because the matter in one is not the matter in the other, but is a different quantity or part, even though of the same kind and amount. 4. A percept is the sense apprehension of an individual reality in its presence. 5. A phantasm is the mental image of an individual reality in its absence. 6. A general concept is the intellectual apprehension of essence. 7. An empirical concept is the indirect intellectual apprehension of an individual. The intellect can know individual objects only indirectly in the phantasms because individuals are material, with one exception, the intellect itself. Because it is a spiritual individual, the intellect can know itself directly and reflexively. See St. Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologiae, Part 1, Question 86, Articles 1 and 3. In a natural object, the following are similar but distinct: substance, essence, nature, form, species. The knowledge of these is the concept, which is expressed fully in the definition and symbolized by the common name. Since man cannot create substance but can merely fashion substances that are furnished by nature, an artificial object such as a chair has two essences: the essence of its matter, wood, iron, marble, etc., and the essence of its form, chair. The essence of the form is expressed in the definition. In this example, the definition of a chair. Frequently, a common name symbolizes a concept that is not simple nor equivalent to the essence of the natural species, like human being, but a composite, like lawyer or athlete, including in its definition certain accidents which determine not natural species but classes that differ only accidentally. A composite concept may be called a construct. Lawyer and athlete are constructs, for their definition adds to the simple concept human being certain accidents such as knowledge of law or physical agility, which are essential to the definition of lawyer or of athlete, although not essential to the definition of a construct. For example, a particular lawyer may be tall, blonde, irritable, generous, etc. But these accidents are not more essential to being a lawyer than they are to being a human being. A construct may be analyzed into its components by showing in what categories its essential meanings lie. Illustration: analysis of constructs. Carpenter. Substance: human being. Quality: skill in building with wood. Legislator. Substance: human being. Action: making laws. Relation: to an electorate. Blizzard. Substance: water. Quality: cold. Passion: vaporized, frozen into snow, blown about by a high wind. In the English language, a construct is usually symbolized by a single word, which does not make explicit the composite character of the construct. In an agglutinated language, like German, a construct is more commonly symbolized by a compound word, which does make explicit its composite character. For example, Abwehrflammenwerfer, defensive flamethrower. Also, the English word tank in German is Raupenschlepper Panzerkampfwagen, a caterpillar-like self-moving armored war wagon. This has been shortened to Panzer, a term familiar through films and books. Logical and psychological dimensions of language. Language has logical and psychological meanings, which may be illustrated through a closer look at the words house and home. If house is represented as A, B, then home may be represented as A, B, X. Objectively, the definition, the logical dimension, of house and home are similar and may be represented by the lines A, B. But subjectively, home is a much richer word, for to its logical content is added an emotional content, the psychological dimension, associated with the word and represented by the line BX. The fact that house has practically no psychological dimension, while home has much, accounts for the different effects produced by the following lines, which are equivalent in the logical dimensions. Illustration: psychological dimension of language. House, house, loved, loved house, there is no place like my house, there is no place like my house. Home, home, sweet, sweet home, there is no place like home, there is no place like home. John Howard Payne, Clary, the Maid of Milan. Logical dimensions of language. The logical or intellectual dimension of a word is thought content, which may be expressed in its definition given in the dictionary. In rhetoric, this is called the denotation of a word. Analogy. Logical and psychological dimensions of language. The logical dimension of language may be compared to the incandescent electrified wire in a transparent bulb. The wire is obvious and its limits are clearly defined. The psychological dimension may be compared to a frosted bulb, in which all the light, it is true, comes from the incandescent wire within, but the light is softened and diffused by the bulb, which gives it a more beautiful and psychologically warmer glow. Language with a purely logical dimension is desirable in legal documents and in scientific and philosophical treatises, where clarity, precision, and singleness of meaning are requisite. Consequently, synonyms, which usually vary in shades of meaning, ought to be avoided, and the same word should be employed throughout to convey the same meaning. Or, if it is used with a different meaning, that fact should be made clear. Abstract words are usually clearer and more precise than concrete words, for abstract knowledge is clearer, although less vivid, than sense knowledge. Yet, to communicate abstract knowledge, one should employ concrete illustrations from which the reader or listener can make the abstraction for himself, since, by doing so, he grasps the abstract ideas much better than if the writer or speaker gave them to him ready-made. Psychological dimensions of language. The psychological dimension of language is in its emotional content. The related images, nuances, and emotion spontaneously associated with words. In rhetoric, this is called the connotation of the word. Propagandists often abuse the connotative value of words. Language with rich psychological dimension is desirable in poetry and other literature, where humor, pathos, grandeur, and sublimity are communicated. In literary composition, one should employ words that are concrete rather than abstract, that are rich in imagery and idiomatic. Synonyms should be used in order to avoid monotony of sound and to convey subtle shades of meaning that vary in both the logical and the psychological dimension. A sensitive awareness of the subtleties of language, particularly in its psychological dimension, enables one to recognize good style in the speech and writing of others, and to cultivate good style in one's own composition, both oral and written. The substance of a given composition may be translated almost perfectly from one language to another in the logical dimension. Translation is seldom satisfactory, however, in the psychological dimension. This is why poetry in translation is usually less pleasing than in the original. Sound and the psychological dimension. Various characteristics of words affect the psychological dimension of language. The mere sound of a word may produce a pleasing effect which another word of the same meaning lacks. In Silver by Walter de la Mare, the poet's substitution of words like shoon for shoes and casements for windows are examples for the poet's use of sound to create a psychological effect. Illustration: the psychological value of sound. Silver. Slowly, silently now the moon walks the night in her silver shoon. This way and that she peers and sees silver fruit upon silver trees. One by one the casements catch her beams beneath the silvery thatch. Couched in his kennel like a log, with paws of silver, sleeps the dog. From their shadowy coat the white breasts peep of doves in a silver feathered sleep. The harvest mouse goes scampering by, with silver claws and a silver eye. A moveless fish in the water gleam by silver reeds in a silver stream. Walter de la Mare. Pedantic style. A pedantic or pompous style is psychologically displeasing. Compare these sentence pairs, identical in logical meaning. Illustration: pedantic style. Behold, the inhabitants have all retired to their domiciles. Look, the people have all gone home. The vaulted dome of heaven is cerulean. The sky is blue. Idiom and emotional effect. The emotional effect of a word, often a byproduct of its historical development, belongs to the idiom of language and would often be lost in translation. The following examples show that sentences alike in logical dimension can be quite different in psychological dimension. Illustration: idiom. A young man tells a young woman, "Time stands when I look into your eyes." Another tells her, "You have a face that would stop a clock." A young man tells a woman, "You are a vision." Another, "You are a sight." At a meeting of the United Nations, an American produced bewilderment amongst the translators by speaking of a proposal as "pork barrel floating on a pink cloud." A fellow American might understand that this is an impractical plan to be financed by public funds designed to gain local politician patronage. Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Baker had dinner together. Asked by Mr. Schofield, "What kind of meat did you have for dinner?" Mrs. Smith replied, "I had roast pork." Mrs. Baker replied, "I had roast swine meat." We find Mrs. Baker's answer revolting because swine has been regarded as a word unfit for polite discourse in English, certainly unfit to name meat, ever since the Norman conquest in 1066. After that, the conquered and deposed Anglo-Saxons tended to live animal and called it swine. But the aristocratic Normans, to whom it was served at the banquet table, called it pork, a word derived from the Latin through the French, and in those languages applied to the live animal as well as to the meat. The associations built into the word swine in the history of the language are felt by modern English-speaking people who do not even know the occasion of the emotional response which they nonetheless experience. Allusion. An allusion is a passing reference to phrases or longer passages which the writer takes for granted will be familiar to the reader. Sometimes the writer changes the phrases somewhat, but whether the same or modified, they depend for their effect on reminding the reader of the original. For example, with malice towards some, is a title deliberately intended to remind the reader of the phrase in Lincoln's second inaugural address, "with malice towards none." An illusion depends for much of its effect on the psychological dimension of language, for it enriches the passage in which it occurs with emotional overtones and associated ideas derived from the context in which it originally appeared. The following examples show the importance of illusion. Illustration: illusion. Most of the paper is as blank as Mordred's shield. Rudyard Kipling, The Man Who Would Be King. Bores make cowards of us all. E.V. Lucas, Bores. Friend, on this scaffold Thomas Moore lies dead, who would not cut the body from the head. J.V. Cunningham, Friends on this Scaffold. For those whose literary background is inadequate and who therefore are unfamiliar with the source of the illusion, a work such as the Concordance to the Bible or to Shakespeare, both frequent sources of illusion, will prove helpful. A dictionary of people and places mentioned in Greek and Latin literature will explain classical illusions. The writers who make illusions expect, of course, that their readers will be familiar at first hand with the literature to which they refer. One of the rewards of literary study is the possession of a heritage of poetry and story which causes many names and phrases to echo with rich reverberations down the centuries. The language of illusion often provides a sort of shorthand which links and communicates in a few words experiences shared by people facing similar situations in all periods of human history. Combination of words. The psychological dimension of words is especially affected by their combinations. Some combinations, particularly of adjectives and of nouns and verbs, are just right. For example, the following combinations in Milton: dappled dawn, checkered shade, leaden stepping hours, disproportioned sin jarred against nature's chime. It is fitting to speak of azure light or the azure sky or an azure evening gown, but not of an azure apron, because azure and apron clash in the psychological dimension. The combination is disharmonious. It is certainly not just right. Certain combinations of words and thoughts produce a vivid concentration of meaning rich in the psychological dimension. Illustration: combination of words. I have stained the image of God in my soul. Catherine of Siena, dialogue. What passing bells for those who die as cattle! Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. Wilfred Owen's Anthem for Doomed Youth. Inland among stones, the surface of a slate-grey lake is lit by the earthed lightning of a flock of swans, their feathers ruffed and ruffling, white on white, their fully grown headstrong-looking head tucked or cresting or busy under water. Seamus Heaney, postscript to the spirit level. The flesh smell of hatred. Evan Boland, The Death of Reason. Logical and poetic understanding. What is false when taken literally in the purely logical dimension may be true when understood imaginatively or figuratively in the psychological dimension. Illustration: poetic use of language. Song. Go and catch a falling star, get with child a mandrake root. Tell me where all past years are, or who cleft the devil's foot. Teach me to hear maidens singing, or to keep off envy's stinging, and find what wind serves to advance an honest mind. If thou be born to strange sights, things invisible to see, write 10,000 days and nights, till age snow-white hairs on thee. Thou, when thou return'st, wilt tell me all strange wonders that befell thee, and swear nowhere lives a woman true and fair. If thou find'st one, let me know, such a pilgrimage were sweet, yet do not, I would not go, though at next door we might meet. Though she were true when you met her, and last till you write your letter, yet she will be false, ere I come to 2 or 3. John Donne. This poem, understood literally in its logical dimension, is false and even ridiculous. But understood imaginatively, as it is meant to be, since it is metaphorical, the poem has emotional truth. The very sound and movement of the words and the symmetry, the parallel grammatical and logical structure of the three stanzas contribute to the pleasing effect.